Morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Ed Palatella. I'm a reporter with the Erie Times News in Go Erie, and I'm here this morning with Bishop Lawrence Persico, the leader of the Catholic Diocese of Erie, and we're here in the library of St. Mark Catholic Center on East Grandview Boulevard. Thank you, Bishop, for being here with us this
Oh, you're
morning.
welcome, Ed.
And behind the camera is our Chief Photography Supervisor, Chris Millette, who will be helping out with questions this morning. So we're here to discuss the Catholic Diocese of Erie's response to the clergy abuse crisis, which the bishop has been very active in addressing that issue. And we're here today, Bishop, because it was a little more than a year ago that you released the list of credibly accused lay people and clergy in the diocese. Those would be people who have been accused credibly of sexually abusing children or other behavior that would disqualify them
Yes.
from any interaction with children within the diocese. So we're here to discuss a little bit of that, but that's why we're here today. When that list first came out in April 6th of last year, it had 51 names, and now it has more than 81. And I know you hope you'll get to a point where it's not growing anymore.
Right.
But you have released periodic updates, and that's where we are right now.
Correct.
So, Bishop, to start out, if you could just explain to our audience how you came to decide to release that list, what was your reasoning behind that, and what you hope that achieves.
I think I can go back to the fact that prior to the release of that list, and while the grand jury was in session and still reviewing the diocese, we had a situation where we had 2 priests removed. And I thought it would be important for the public to be aware. They had nothing to do with, one did not have anything to do with child abuse. So I released those names and received a very positive response from the people. They were grateful because they were able to be made aware. And I remember when you came to interview me right after that, you had asked me, well, how do you alert people? And as I told you, there's not a good way. But when we decided, and it was again an evolution, that we were going to release names because it would be, one, a way to notify the general public, especially if some of these perpetrators were alive, and secondly, it helps the victims and validates their experience so that they know that they're not alone or in the dark anymore, that the name of their perpetrator is out there for the public to see.
And we spoke about this before, Bishop, in terms of releasing names or even dealing with priests who have been credibly accused of abuse and have not been prosecuted for whatever reason, the statute of limitations, or those priests were never reported. In some respects, there's a dilemma because the diocese could either keep them as priests and keep them, in a certain spot where the diocese could keep an eye on them, so to speak, or defrock them or release them from the priesthood because of what they've done, but then they're out in the public and they're not prosecuted, they're not in prison, they're out in the public. So it seems like that's kind of an issue that a lot of dioceses have been grappling with.
It is. It is an issue because, first of all, again, it goes back to alerting the people so that they know that this person is like that, and especially if it's 30 or 40 years ago that the crime was committed. Secondly, there's no way for us to police them outside of removing their ability to function and alerting the public to their behavior. Unfortunately, if you don't alert people of their behavior, what's going to happen is then they come off as there's nothing wrong with them and create this feeling that they're just not active anymore, like being retired. So I think it's very important that we try to do as much as we can to keep the public informed and keep them from ministry.
And your list, the diocese list, is unprecedented in many respects, but one of the main ones is that there's lay people on the list. Which, have you known of any other diocese to do that?
As of yet, no,
Mm-hmm.
no.
And why did you decide to do that?
Well, when our information, our files were sent to the Attorney General, and the grand jury was investigating, I asked our lawyers to continue on their own to investigate. And we found claims against lay people, allegations against lay people. And I thought, well, let's just clean house. Put everything out there, whether they're clergy or lay, and let the people know. Because if we have a teacher who was credibly accused of abuse, sexual abuse, and then nothing is said, what if they go to another school? There's no way to protect those children because they still have their license to teach. So I said, well, let's just do everyone.
And just to be clear, we're talking about cases where the statute of limitations has expired.
Correct.
And I mean, in current cases, you have your protocol where
Right.
police are notified in that.
Right.
But we're
And
talking about previous cases.
In the old cases, yes. Currently, we have a protocol, and then, we follow that.
And in terms of your investigation, how are you able to determine whether these claims are credible, whether it's against clergy or lay people? Is it looking through your files and seeing if there's an admission, or can you just explain the weighing that goes on in determining? Because that's a big, you're saying that this person is, these allegations
Yes.
are credible. That's a big deal.
That is. And, that's not done in haste either, because often, this is why we have professional investigators doing it. They do the investigating, and they have a certain level of credibility that they follow. And that's all in our policy that's online. And they spend many hours talking to witnesses, listening to the story of the victim, and gathering as much evidence as possible before we take any action. Some of these cases have been studied for months. So it's just not like a victim comes forward and said, I've been abused by X, Y, and Z, and they say, okay, it's true. Everything is investigated because we need to be able to speak to the victim. Our investigators need to be able to speak to the victim so that they understand what happened and what kind of evidence they can give to prove it.
And now, do you notify the accused or the victim or if anyone's dead, the survivors of the accused or the victim, before you release the names to notify that this is happening?
Survivors of the accused.
Right, or survivors of the victims if the victims are.
Well, sometimes we don't have that information,
Okay.
so it makes it very difficult. It would be nice if we had that information to be able to alert them. In some instances, we were able to, but in others, we were not, because we don't have the information.
Now, certainly with a lot of the clergy, you've been able to notify them in some instances.
In some instances, that's correct.
Right. Moving on a little bit, Bishop, can you explain the compensation fund that the diocese has created for
Yes.
victims and survivors of abuse, where that's at right now, and just give a general overview of that.
Okay. Right now, we have created the fund. It went online in mid-February, and it's being administered by Feinberg and Associates. And they are doing all of the they take the information that our investigators have, and then they make a determination of it. So they review it. I am not a part of that, nor is the diocese. And then they make the determination on the what compensation the victim would get. And all we do is get a notification from them on how much we have to payout.
Now, that claims period, the 6-month claim period ends in August.
Correct.
Do you know at this point how many claims have been filed?
I can't give an exact number, but I know that we have concluded about 6.
About 6.
Yeah.
And there's probably quite a few under investigation.
There's quite a few under investigation, yes. So I would be guessing, to be honest with you, Ed, on what the numbers are, because, as I said, I'm not there.
Okay.
A question from our audience. Michelle is asking, when a priest is
Laicized.
for misconduct, the church no longer knows their whereabouts. Do you provide the names of the accused priests for whom you've separated to the authorities?
The question from one of our viewers is, do we notify law enforcement when a priest is laicized and moves out of the area? We do notify the Attorney General's office as well as the district attorney to make them aware that someone is out, that's been laicized, and it's beyond the statute of limitation. So we try to keep law enforcement informed.
And you're talking, of course, instances where someone's been laicized due to abuse allegations. I mean,
Yes.
It can be laicized for other reasons.
Oh, you
as
could be
well.
laicized for a number of reasons.
Right,
Good
right.
point of clarification, Ed, thank you. They could be laicized for a number of reasons that they feel that they're no longer called to priesthood. And in cases of abuse, where a priest is laicized, or as we know it, is defrocked, we keep the appropriate people informed.
If I could just follow up on that, Bishop, I got a question, an email question from David Closey, who's with SNAP, and it's kind of related to this. He asked, now that you finally post the names of credibly accused abusive clerics, will you also reveal for each of the accused the date church officials first heard of the allegations and or reveal their last known whereabouts so parents can protect kids?
Well, what we do right now, and this is kind of the ideal that we're aiming at, what we do right now is we put where they are. So in other words, if the person is in Erie or a place in Florida or Arizona, that's the last known address, then we post that. My goal with our list is eventually to put all of their assignments and where they were last listed. We're hopefully going to be able to do that.
And I have heard from victims who called me and said that when they've called the diocese with questions, the lawyers or whomever have provided information
Yes.
as to where those people have been. And then it's important too, Bishop, to note in terms of access that as part of the compensation fund, you've said that victims would have access to their files. Can you explain how that works and
Yes.
and whether they can photocopy those files or how that
Well, it's
dissemination
my understanding is that they just receive them. They don't have to just, they're not forced to come in and just read them. They can get a copy because it's their files, and I don't have anything to hide. I know a few attorneys of victims were kind of surprised that we would do that. As a matter of fact, I've heard from our attorneys who said that they've given files to people who haven't even applied to the fund, but they've requested them.
And then following up on Mr. Plessy's question, he says the first bishops revealed predators' names back in 2002. You became Erie's bishop in 2012. How do you excuse or justify, he says, endangering kids by your secrecy these past 7 years?
Well, I think that's very simple answer, because when I first came here, I was told everything was in good shape. And quite frankly, what had happened was I began to hear from victims. And it made me wonder what kind of shape we were in. So because when you become a bishop, the first thing you do, it's not the first thing you do is go over and read the files of every abuse victim. In an ideal world, maybe that would be the case, but you have to learn how to be a bishop at the same time. So anyway, that's why I asked the Erie County District Attorney's Office to come in, gave them, said, here are the file cabinets, look at each file. I'm not going to ask you which ones, just look at them. Well, when they saw the amount of files, they made clear to me that they would have to take their time in doing this because this was not their full-time job, which they started to do, but then later we were served a subpoena. So
By the Attorney General's office.
from the Attorney General's office, correct, thank you. I know it appears that I was being secretive, but I was operating out of the concept that things were handled. So it wasn't until victims started coming to me that I began to question what was going on.
I have another question, Bishop, I received by email. It's kind of a legal, technical question. The reader asks, in terms of the seal of confession, if a child or young person mentions to a priest in confession that he or she was molested and mentions a name, can that be revealed to the authorities, or how? Can you explain how,
Okay.
basically, how the reporting requirements apply to clergy in general and in the context of the confession?
Under the seal of confession, a priest is not allowed to break the seal. That's punishable by church law, which means he could be excommunicated or will be excommunicated. The procedure that we encourage them to do is, if a victim comes in, a child or even a teenager, is to encourage them to go to an adult that they trust and tell them what happened. And try to work with the person without revealing the fact that it was heard in confession. But work with the person in trying to get a trusted adult or a trusted person, whether it be a teacher, a parent, and have them go to authorities.
Now, if a revelation or a disclosure is made outside of confession to a cleric, are they're mandatory
Mandatory
reporters?
reporters,
So
absolutely.
they have to report to Childline and the other authorities?
Absolutely.
And that's part of your protocol?
That's
as
part of
well?
the protocol. They have to call Childline.
Okay, anything else on that you can think of in terms of reporting and
No,
what people
it
can expect?
is very difficult because, you know, you're dealing with a sacrament and a person bearing their soul, but also you have to try to protect that person and at the same time protect the confidentiality of the sacrament of reconciliation, of confession.
Going back to the compensation fund for a
Sure.
moment, can you explain, and you've done this before, can you explain, in your view, why you favor a fund rather than having a window for, what I mean by a window is, there's been proposed legislation in the Pennsylvania General Assembly that would create a 2-year window for victims of clergy abuse and other abuse to sue, no matter how long ago that happened or whether the statute of limitations has expired. That proposal seems not to be going anywhere. There's a new proposal that would create a window via a constitutional amendment, which is going to take some time. But why do you favor a compensation fund rather than the rollback in the statute of limitations?
Okay. I think if they did the, as you said, the rollback for the statute of limitation doesn't seem to be doing much traction. So you have that. You have the constitutional change. Whatever they do, there's certainly going to be pushback on that. So it could be held up in court, and I think the simplest way to try to help these people now is to provide a compensation fund. Because when you talk about doing a window legislation retroactive, it makes it, you have a number of people who will oppose that. On the other hand, with our fund, we can compensate them now and let it go.
And just to be clear, with compensation fund, if a victim chooses that route, once that his or her case is settled, they sign something saying
Correct.
they will not sue if the statute of limitation is rolled back.
Is rolled back, that's right.
They will not sue in that forum.
Right.
Because they've been satisfied there. Do you think that puts victims in a bind in a way, Bishop, that they have to decide whether they're gonna go with the compensation fund or wait out the legislature to see what happens
Well,
in that venue?
I just think what we're doing is giving them a choice. You can, if you want to wait, that's fine. Or if you want to request the funding now, you can. So we're basically giving them a choice.
In terms of the fund, you've mentioned before that it also allows the diocese to some degree to have some more control over the financial ramifications. Can you explain why that's a concern for you?
Well, you know, as I've said before, there are two groups of people that I have to be concerned about. It's the victims and those who sit in the pew. You know, for all of our problems, the church has done a great deal of ministry in the community and in the parishes. So I have to try to maintain that degree, whether it's charitable work, education, counseling, whatever it may be. I feel that I need to keep that going, but also I need to do something for the victims. So I'm trying to balance both of these things to help both the victim and the man and woman in the pew.
And can you explain, I mean, there's been a number of cases of this nationwide. Can you explain what happens when a diocese files for bankruptcy?
Well, basically, when you file for bankruptcy, you kind of lose all control of what you're able to do. Some places had shut down ministries, they lay off people who work for the diocese and that. And it basically, the court takes over control.
And you've heard, Bishop, from people who said, you know, nationally, locally, well, you know, hey, that's the diocese's problem if they file for bankruptcy. I mean, my life was ruined, my relative's life was ruined by this abuse. I should get some financial recourse here, and I don't know what to tell you, diocese, but that's just, this should have been handled years ago. It wasn't, so
Yeah, and I understand that point of view, I really do. But I also, and again, this is my bind, where I feel that I need to take care of people who are still in need, whether charities, education, because then do I just create more victims? Do I create more victims by taking away everything that, the good works that we have been doing, and say, well, you know, too bad, go to the state for charitable works, or go to someone else to be educated. So, I mean, it's very difficult, and I'm trying to balance that.
how are the diocese finances?
Well, we're not bankrupt yet, but we're fortunate that there was good and frugal management of the finances. So all of this investigation, whether with the grand jury or what we're doing on our own, has cost us a great deal of money. But I think it's well worth, the spending is well worth it, because we really need to clean this up and try to get it right.
In terms of parish attendance or parish giving, have you seen any changes?
I think it's a little early to tell, and it's been sporadic too. Some have indicated they've seen no change. Some have indicated that some of their attendance may be down. Others have said they maintain their collection. Because really, like, we're in the midst of our Catholic stewardship appeal. Well, I made it very clear to the people in the pews that that is not going towards the fund, but for the operations.
And just to be clear on that, Bishop, you've said publicly that the money for the investigations and the payments would be made out of investment income or budgetary surpluses rather than straight from the plate, so to speak.
Right. I can't take, parish money, contrary to what people like to believe, that it all goes to Erie. But certainly parishes are assessed, like, the dioceses are assessed. And we've tried and made that very clear. I don't take that money. This is money, obviously it does come from the people, but this is money that we've, over the years, have been able to invest for the diocese. And also, we try to run a tight budget, so any surpluses would be our surpluses, and we just put that aside.
Bishop, we have a few minutes left.
Sure.
Just want to ask you, you've met with victims, you've spoken to victims. What have you learned when you come away with this, when you're thinking about where the diocese is at this point? What resonates with you after hearing from all these victims?
That we still have to do as much as we can to be vigilant. We can't let our guard down. We have to earn people's trust, and that's going to take a long time. I've been very overwhelmed by some of the victims, and just what they experienced in their life is terrible, and how it's affected them through adulthood and sometimes even old age. So it's been a real eye-opener for me.
And what do you tell them?
Well, first of all, I think they need to hear an apology, that, I'm sorry for what they've experienced, and it should never have happened. These were people they trusted, they put their faith in, and for some of them, they were like God. And it's like God betrayed them too. It's just a terrible, terrible experience for them.
Bishop, is there anything else you'd like to add or want people to know about what you've been dealing with, or have anything to say about where you're at right now with this?
No, we are just keep moving forward and dealing with each piece of it as it comes forward. But we certainly haven't left our guard down, or in no way do I think that this is over.
Well, thank you again, Bishop. We
Oh, you're
appreciate
welcome,
your
Ed.
time.
Sure, thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for being here on our Facebook Live. We appreciate your questions, and we'll be reporting on this in tomorrow's Erie Times News and Go Erie. Thank you once again for your attention and being with us here today.